The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There was a big, horrible story that got a lot of attention involving a fatal crash that killed a pedestrian named Elaine Hertzberg in Tempe, Arizona, a couple of months ago. And it was involving a self-driving car, an Uber self-driving car. We now have the information about what happened, and a software bug caused the car to behave the way it did and lead to the death of the pedestrian, Elaine Hertzberg. And we now have the information from anonymous sources that have spoken to individuals directly knowledgeable about this. And what we are told is that Uber's sensor did detect Hertzberg as she was crossing the street with her bicycle, but the software classified her as a false positive and decided it didn't need to stop for her. Does it change the tragedy? It doesn't change the tragedy. Does it change that it malfunctioned? No. Is it interesting to know that it's not that the software missed her, but rather that the software identified her as a false positive that could be ignored? For us, it doesn't really matter. I'm sure in the world of the programming of these technologies, it's a really big deal that it wasn't a missed pedestrian. It was a pedestrian that was identified as a false positive and written off. Doesn't make it any less tragic.
Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure what that even means. Does that mean that it thought it was a piece of trash in the road, or like, you know, something small enough that could be run over without any human impact?
The idea is that the systems are aware that there are both real objects and illusory, how do you say that word? Illusory?
Illusory?
Illusory? Illusory
Elusive?
ones. Imagine non-existent ones that appear to be there but actually aren't from the point of view of the sensors, right? And that this is a big deal for self-driving cars. If there's water on the car and it's dripping in a particular way, the sensor needs to realize that that is not actually something in the road that you might hit, but it's actually like water on the sensor, just as one example. In the same way, there can be pieces of trash that blow across the road or whatever else.
Sure.
And the system needs to be able to ignore those, because otherwise every time a cigarette butt or one of Pat's Dunkin' Donuts cups accidentally, of course he would never litter, stumbles across the street, the car would come to a screeching halt. So this is like a big thing in the programming of these self-driving cars. And what we learned is it identified it as an object that did not require stopping.
Okay, so obviously autonomous vehicles are going to be a great thing for humanity.
Yep.
Far lower automobile accidents and deaths. I think that's a surefire thing that we can say at this point. But we'll still have these incidences. And I think it's in part because sometimes human judgment is the best way to go about solving things. If you have a circumstance where you're driving along and a deer runs into the road, what do? It's a split-second decision. Do you hit the brakes? Do you keep going and try to avoid the deer? You know, if you're going to be swerving, there are other lanes of traffic that you have to take caution with.
Sure.
And so I don't know if software can better assess one of those circumstances as well as humans can. It's tough.
This is a version of the trolley problem. Okay, the trolley problem being train is bearing down the railroad tracks and it's about to run 4 people over. You have the option to flip a lever and it will redirect the train onto a side rail where it will only kill 1 person. Will you do it? The utilitarian approach says you're going to save 4 people, but you're going to kill 1. The one of being an influencing force says, if the train is out of control, I feel better not participating and influencing. As soon as if the train just is out of control and it happens to be barreling down towards 4 people, I don't think that I should interfere with that and make the decision to kill this other person who otherwise would be completely safe. That's sort of the trolley problem in principle. What we have here is, just to pick some numbers, imagine that 40,000 people a year are killed in car accidents currently. Imagine that if we switch to 100% autonomous vehicles, we reduce the number from 4,000 to 1,000, 40,000 to 1,000. But those 1,000 are going to die because of programming errors in the autonomous driving software and sensors misreading, for example, pedestrians as just pieces of paper on the street. We've saved 39,000 people, but we've taken it out of the context of being 40,000 individual incidents controlled by just the drivers, the human drivers making decisions and mistakes, to software, and machines. Are we okay with that? I don't know.
I don't know if it's completely analogous to the trolley problem, and we could go down that road if you want to consider that.
It would be society deciding whether we pull the lever, right? It's society deciding, do 40,000 keep dying based on human driving, or do a different 1,000 die as a result of our societal pulling of the lever, so to speak?
I think we got to take the utilitarian approach.
You do?
I think we go with the 1,000 over the 40,000, yeah.
It's hard to argue against it. It really, really is. I mean, I'm open to hearing from the audience, but it is tough for me to argue against that. Police killings are cutting short the lives of more people of color, according to a new report. This is not surprising, right? More than half of people killed by police are white, but Hispanics and African Americans are on average younger. I read that incorrectly. While just over half of people killed by police are white, Hispanics and African Americans are on average younger when they are killed by police, and people of Black, Hispanic, and Native American background are disproportionately killed by police. This is not shocking information. Okay, we have had this data for a very long time. The question that some of the, let me say, there are social scientists arguing in good faith that will bring this up. There are so-called alt-rightists and race realists that will bring this up. They will say, yes, blacks and Hispanics are killed disproportionately frequently in comparison to their population, but are they killed disproportionately frequently in relation to how many crimes they commit? And they think that that's a really tidy summation of why this isn't really an issue, police violence against non-white individuals. But of course, that fails to account for the fact that there is racially tinged policing, where you have more police in certain neighborhoods that are not white. So by definition, even if blacks and whites are committing a particular crime with the same frequency, if you put more police in the black neighborhood, you're going to get police interacting with black people more. That's going to lead to more prosecution. It will lead to more violent incidents between police and black people. So this data in and of itself is not new. We've been dealing with data like this for a long time. It really requires multivariate thinking to actually look at causal relationships here rather than ones that are merely linked in a correlation sense.
You know, there are so many social scientists out there, or people on the alt-right, folks like Larry Elder, I think, argues this too. They say that there is no more systematic racism in the United States, and that stuff has all been done away with since the Jim Crow era, I guess. Do you think that disproves this new study? Do you think that argues against that? I mean, it's tough to come up with anything conclusive from this because there are a number of factors, as you mentioned.
I think the better study is when you look at, for example, drug crimes. We know that as far as drug use, there's no huge difference in drug use from white, Hispanic, and black individuals. In fact, depending on the region of the country and what drugs we're talking about, whites are using drugs at a higher, in a higher proportion, higher frequency than those other racial groups. And yet, more people are arrested and prosecuted and convicted and on average given harsher sentences for those crimes when they are not white. So to me, that's the type of data we need to look at, not just what's the proportion of police killings, because that gives us one part of the picture, but there's a lot more underlying it that we need to look at.
That drug example, I think, is a lot more straightforward and there are fewer variables, whereas with this stuff, you know, you have to deal with if the person was resisting arrest.
Of course.
Did they have a gun on them? There are just so many different things. And because I think police violence and police brutality, they're not incredibly common, you know, I think it would be tough to
most cops are good, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be tough to come up with a database on such a topic, whereas drug arrests, those are a lot more common in our society. So I think we can assess those numbers a little bit more easily.
There's a counterpoint to everything you mentioned, though, right? Resisting arrest, we know, is one of those, quote, charges that can be very easily added on when you need something, right? It's one of those favorites of police when they say, well, there's really no crime, but we're going to say resisting arrest because I think that the person kind of turned away from me when I wanted to check their pockets or whatever.
Pain, so that was
right. That's number one.
Resisting.
Number two is, what was the second one you mentioned? Resisting arrest and...
if they have a gun on them.
If they have a gun on them. If they have a gun on them sounds pretty simple. If the police think they might have a gun on them, very quickly tells us how even that one is not the objective measure that we would hope it to
Or
be.
if you're more conspiratorial, if they planted a gun on them.
We don't even need to get into the ham sandwich thing. Yeah, I know, but I guess the point is, for all of these counterpoints, there are further counterpoints.
Yeah, that's why we have arguments.
Yes, it is. Exactly. Consumers can no longer plead ignorance when they order that deep dish pizza or the triple cheeseburger and say, I didn't know how many calories it had, because starting this week, federal rules will require restaurant, grocery, and convenience store chains to post calorie counts for all standard items on their menu. Consumers should expect to see labels on display boards, on the handout menus, and on digital kiosks at chains that have 20 or more locations. This will be most noticeable at mid-size and regional restaurants and grocery stores, since most of the country's largest chains already do this because of a congressional menu labeling law in 2010. And this is actually quite controversial. Public health groups say it's really good to have this information. It's good to have calorie information on food, because even subconsciously, it might sort of nudge consumers to make healthier choices, especially when people are eating out a lot. But there are those in the food industry who are saying these things are, number one, expensive because we've got to reprint all of our menus. It's expensive because all the food has to be tested, and we need to know what are the calorie counts here. And also that it can be sort of difficult to implement in a way that they like and don't feel is a sort of interruption to the dining experience. Although I don't know how much McDonald's cares about the dining experience. As you know, I haven't been to a McDonald's in 15 years, other than to go to the bathroom once near Washington Square in New York City. But other than that incident, I don't really know what's going on at McDonald's and what the experience is like. But there is a lot of controversy here, and of course the restaurant lobby is huge, and they are pushing against this. Do you think, big picture, this is good to have?
It's good for consumer choice, I think. I understand why the restaurant industry would be arguing against it, because it seems like it is an undue burden, not so much on the big chains because they could certainly afford it, but like these small mom and pop places.
Okay.
Although I guess the penalty isn't that severe. They'll just they'll check up on them and make sure that it gets implemented at some point.
I just don't know that the small mom and pops actually are subject to this, because it's for mid-size and regional restaurants. So I'm wondering if like your 10-seat mom and pop Williamsburg, Brooklyn bistro even is subject to this law. I think they might not be.
I love it when restaurants have the calories posted on their menus, and it's always because I'm trying to get the best deal possible.
Of course.
The most bang for my buck. So
Calories
it's actually,
per dollar, yeah.
I'm doing the opposite thing. If I see something that's $10 but only 300 calories,
right.
I'm not going to get
for that, yeah.
If it's $8 and 800 calories, sign me up for that.
Yeah, I have a funny story about that. There's a taco and burrito place in Western Mass that I've been going to since I was in college. And at some point, they started putting calorie counts on the menu, not because they had to, but because, you know, it's Western Massachusetts. There's this thing called the tofu curtain. People just like doing this. They'll do this stuff on their own, out of their own goodwill in many cases. And I saw that the item I normally order was like over 1,000 calories. And I said, what the hell? How is that possible? It's like, I know that I don't get hungry too soon after I have this item, but how is it possible that that is 1,000 calories? And then I thought through it, and former producer Lewis went to this restaurant with me once, and we were thinking about it, and we realized it's a quesadilla, right? Yeah. And the quesadilla is served with rice and beans, pico, and a thing of sour cream.
Sour cream will do it.
And what I realized was they're putting the calorie count of everything that comes on the plate. I don't touch the sour cream. I use hot sauce. I don't know how many calories are in what's probably 3 or 4 tablespoons of sour cream, but it's probably a couple hundred calories, don't you think?
So, yeah, that's what'll do it.
Not to mention that I also don't have like all the huge thing of rice. So then I realized, like, if I'm having half the rice and none of the sour cream, it's no longer 1,000 calorie thing. It's probably more like 600 or something like that, right? Because the rice and the sour cream seem to be the most calorie intensive. Anyway, the point is, sometimes it's not super clear how it translates to what you're eating if they're including, you know, that it comes with a side of whatever, and you're only dipping into that a little bit. I don't know.
All right. Slippery slope argument, if you'll indulge me. People will say that calories aren't the most important thing when it comes to your health. It's more about getting the right macronutrient ratios. So calories we're going to be posting today, but next year could we add the fat content, the saturated fat content, protein, and carbs, and all the different nutrients and vitamins? And then the entire menu is just taken up by nutrition facts, and we don't want that.
Some places already do.
Really?
Yeah, there are chains. I've seen. I don't know which ones, but I think in airports I notice it when I walk by. I think that there are some, like it could be Chipotle or something, where they list the item, and then it will list calories, fat, carbs, protein, sugars, or something like that.
That's cool.
And I guess, I mean, I don't know.
Do you think this move will inspire people to eat less? I guess the studies are showing that people, when they go to restaurants that post the calories, they'll eat 20 to 30 fewer calories, which isn't that substantial, but it's something, I guess.
It's something, yeah. I mean, I think that all of these things, we know from Brian Wansink's work, smaller plates get people to eat a little bit less. Posting the calories probably gets people to eat a little bit less. Yeah, I think it will have an effect, but will it be huge? Hard
to say. This talk is making me hungry.
Yeah, not surprised. I've got a gallon of sour cream if you want that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Vegan sour cream, of course. Soy-based, completely soy-based. All right, that's it for today's bonus show. We'll talk to you next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.